Hello and welcome back to Regenesis Sanctuary. This time we're starting on the final stretch of our Asian temperate area. And we're going to be taking some inspiration from Bangladesh for the Gharial. I did already plan out the area I wanted to use for the Gharial previously, but I kind of changed my mind, so I reshaped it a little bit. For the Gharial, I want an inside enclosure because it makes most sense for these animals, so I wanted to make a Bengal temple on top of a hill. So I start off by constructing the hill using the terrain tools. Once I am happy with the height, I flatten out the top and start building the temple. I'm using the Indonesian bricks mostly because they are recolorable, which makes me absolutely love these. I start off by making a square building in which the Gharial habitat is separated out. I put a second layer of brick on top of it and then started recoloring them to a color that seems accurate to the inspiration pictures that I found. Then I started working on one of the walls. I noticed that Bengal temples have this curved shaped roof, so for now I already created that slope a little bit using the 1 meter high pieces, and of course I created an opening for the entrance. Then I started detailing it. I first started out with these brick pieces with the square holes in them that I do quite like, but they turned out to be a little bit small. The Bengal temples have a lot of details on them that seem to be separated in squares, so I did want to keep that, but the squares of these pieces were just a little bit too small. Then I started puzzling around with these South American temple pieces that have quite a bit of detail on them already and made them perfect for this. I could also recolor them to match the brick a little bit better. Once I created one detailed square that I was happy with, I copied it 4 times next to each other and separated them out using these beams. I then copied this on top of each other 4 times as well. To border it, I put up these brick pillars, and after cleaning it up a little bit, I copied it over to the other side as well. For the sides, I added some more of these detailed pieces, but in a little bit of a different pattern. Then I wanted some more detail on top of these bricks, and they did have detailed pillars on the Bengal temples as well, and I figured out that these pots are recolorable, making them perfect for this. I stacked up a bunch of these pots on top of each other and recolored them a bit to match the brick, and it created the perfect details for the pillars. The entrances of these Bengal temples have these arched doorways with pillars in between, so I just used these arched wall pieces that actually matched fairly well. For detailing them a bit more, I did end up using these brick pieces with the square holes in them. To have the arch that we will be creating in the roof come back over here as well, I used these pieces to create a curved shape. Then I lined them with the 1 meter brick pillars because I could just curve it a bit more with those. To make sure the curve was symmetrical, I made it on one side and then just copied it over on the other side. At this point I did decide that the South Asian temple pieces were a little bit dark still, so I recolored them again to make them match the brick even more. The South American temple pieces came in handy for the pillars again as well. I used these pieces to create a base for them, and once I centered that, I built it up to the pillar itself. I did take out the mossy color on the higher up pieces because I thought the very sharp line for the moss otherwise looked a little unnatural. I really just started playing around with these pieces until I had a design that I was quite happy with. Then I copied it over to the other pillars, but I did notice that the base of it was a little bit too wide for people to actually walk through, so I did end up changing that design again. I took out the bottom part and then decided to bring it straight down using different pieces. I do like how there's a little bit of moss on these pieces already, so it looks a little bit worn. That really saves me from having to go to town with all the decal pieces as well. Now that I figured out that the South American temple pieces were recolorable, I started using them everywhere. Also these little trim pieces that were perfect for some extra detailing. I also put some of these detailing pieces inside of the little squares for even more detailing. I really do think that in the end this is one of the most detailed builds I've ever made in Planet Zoo, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. The arches were looking a little bit empty, so I took these half flower pieces and created a circle with them so that just the leaves were sticking out of the arch, which created a perfect little detailing around the edge. Then it was time to create the actual arch that I was talking about. I used these 2 meter tall pillars because they were fairly easy to curve around, and they created an arch that seemed fairly similar to what you see in real life. Once the arch was finished, I did copy it and create a second arch that was just raised a little bit more. The rest of this middle wall was still looking a little bit empty, so I just continued with some more of the detailing that I had already used before. After that, there were still a couple of gaps to clean up here and there. For the top of the pillars, I used the South American temple pieces as well in a similar way to the pillars at the bottom. For the roof, I was using these thatch roof pieces because once again I could curve these quite easily. Because I was using the Align to Surface tool, they were already kind of matching up with the brick pieces underneath, which made it a little bit easier to create the right shape. At this point I was quite happy with the one wall, so it was time to finish the rest of the building really quickly by just copying all of this 4 times around the building. As you can see on 2 sides it didn't quite match up with the wall that was already there, so I did end up removing that and building it all over again. That didn't really take as much time as it would have if I just created the whole detailing bit again. Then it was time to continue on the rest of the roof. I copied the entire strip of thatch with the curve on it and lifted it up a little bit and curved it inwards a little bit to continue the curve towards the top of the building. I kept repeating this until I was almost at the middle, and then I copied all of these thatch pieces to the other 4 quarters. I was expecting a lot of unevenness in the corners, but it wasn't actually as bad as I expected. And to fix that, I just deleted some unnecessary pieces and turned some others around until I thought they matched up quite nicely with the ones next to it. It did take a little bit of fiddling, but I wanted it to look quite neat, and I think I managed decently in the end. There really just wasn't any corner piece that fit this corner, so I had to improvise a little. These temples often have a little tower on top of them, which is what we're making right here. These towers often have a lot of windows in them, so I used the arch pieces again with a wall piece underneath it. Then I started detailing it with some brick pillars and some more of the stacked pots. For this one I did decide that the stacked pots looked better upside down, so I ended up turning them around. I added some more of these detailed squares as well, and the same detailing for the arch that we used in the arches for the entrance. I did decide that I wanted it to be a little taller, so I put another wall piece on top and adjusted the detailing as well. I added some detailed trim to the pillars, and I added a base for the roof to sit on. This too has a domed thatch roof, so I started fiddling around with the same roof pieces again. Using the same way of curving them up, but because this had to be a little bit more steep, I put them all at a larger angle. Once I was happy with the complete wall design, I copied it over to the other side and then on all 4 sides. Then I copied this entire building once more to put it at another angle, so you would have 8 different sides to this little tower. There was still a little bit of a gap between the pieces of the walls, so I put this diagonal pillar in there to fix that up. Then to make it easier on myself and to make it more symmetrical, I deleted all of the other wall pieces again and copied them over with the pillar so that it would all line up nicely. Because you can't actually copy 2 buildings at once, I did decide to put it on top of the roof first before adding the second 4 pieces. Then all I had to do was fix up some little gaps in the roof and on the base holding the roof up. As a finishing touch, I used these temple pieces to create a nice little spire on top of the tower. Now that the outside of the building is mostly done, it was time to move on to the inside. From the reference pictures that I found that they have a lot of curved ceilings in these temples, with a lot of pillars going down to the floor. So that's what I'm making next. Once I have one of them finished, I copied it throughout the entire building, which I think looked pretty cool. However, it did kind of block the sight from a lot of areas, so I do end up changing a little bit of it later. Because this building is a little far from other facilities, I did leave some space for a water filter and an electricity generator, as well as a keeper hut. Then it was time to put the guest baths in. I wanted them to be able to walk right up close to the Gharial habitat, but I also wanted them to be able to see them from up top, so I created this little raised platform that they could go up and see them. And on the other side of this building there will be part of another habitat, so I'll be leaving that empty for now. I cleaned up the staff facilities a little bit with some extra brick walls, and then I used this temple flooring for the floors. I also used them to line the raised piece of path. Then it was finally time to start on the actual habitat itself. I wanted the guests to be able to see the Gharials underwater, so that's where most of the viewing is gonna be. Then of course they need some land as well, so I needed to raise the terrain a lot in the back of the habitat. Then it was time to put in the barriers. I used the glass barriers for this because it needs to hold back the water, and these are the only barriers that will do that. As much as it was possible, I hid them within the pillars and the walls of the building. Then I filled it with water, but it wasn't quite as high as I would like it to be, so I needed to do a little bit more fiddling around with the terrain and the barriers. At the back of the habitat there were of course these two openings that I left for the entrances, but on this side there won't be any entrances, so I decided to close it up with a half wall to leave some windows out for some nice sunlight for the Gharials. This little staff hallway also has the entrance to the habitat, and I thought it would be nice if there was a little window where the staff could also check up on the Gharials. Completely unnecessary, but I liked it. This is the point where I looked into the habitat from where the guests are supposed to view, and I noticed that the pillars really did block a lot of your vision, so I wanted to take out a large part of them. Then it was time to add the Gharials, and I noticed they actually did not have enough space to move around because their hitboxes are absolutely huge. I didn't know this, but it really was creating problems for them moving around, so I ended up taking all of the pillars out of the habitat. Then I took out the terrain paint tools and slowly started layering some sand, soil and rock together, putting most of the rock texture underneath the water because that makes most sense to me. I did end up taking out the water for a little bit because I kind of wanted them to be able to swim underwater, and it needed to be deeper for that, so I made the whole pool a little bit deeper. Then it was time to make the habitat actually look a little nicer, so I used some reeds, some bushes, and I started using a bunch of rocks. I also ended up adding one nice little feature tree that didn't use up too much space and wasn't too high, so it looked fairly natural in here. Because most of the viewing is the underwater area, I do want to make that look good as well, so I started filling it up with the strangler roots to create a little bit more of a natural environment. I used them basically all over the walls and the bottom of this pool until I was happy with how much it filled up. Then I added a bunch of underwater plants as well, with some different colors and textures to mix it up a little bit. I think the combination of these different plants really look great together. Then I created some more rock formations where I used the mossy rocks, the jungle rocks and the temperate rocks and overlapped them just above the ground to create a bit of a varied color scheme. And I also put them kind of inside of each other where just little bits were poking out, so you'd have a more varied rock formation. Because I knew that the Gharials aren't really good at maneuvering terrain, I did pay attention to keep it as flat as possible. However, when I was happy with the results and I checked if they could walk around the entire habitat, it was an absolute disaster. They did not have enough space to walk around at all, and they could not get onto the rocks at all either. So unfortunately, I then deleted most of the rocks and flattened out the entire terrain as much as possible first. I also removed some bushes and some details around the pillars of the outside of the building. Then I started adding some rocks again, but this time being even more careful to put it as much in the ground as possible and as much to the side of the habitat as possible, so it would interfere with their movement as little as possible. Then I looked into what plants don't actually have hitboxes, and I started using these scaviola bushes all around because they didn't interfere with the movement of the animals, which was great, so I could fill it up with these bushes and not worry about it. Gharials aren't the most social of creatures, so it is always good to have a habitat where they can hang out in corners where they can't be seen by each other, so I did also use these bushes to create some places where they could lie behind it and not see any other Gharials. Of course, I also added in a food platform and some enrichment. Another plant that doesn't have a hitbox is the hosta, so I used both of the variations of the hosta all over the habitat as well. I also created my own little bigger version where I take the largest one on the bottom, then put the medium one on top of that and the small one on top of that, and copied that variation a bunch of times as well. The water hyacinths actually don't affect their movement either, and I liked the way they looked on top of the water, so I added a bunch of those for the Gharials to swim around in. And that was about it for the habitat itself. Now this building did still need a ceiling, and I really liked the curved ceilings that I saw in the pictures, but I was kind of struggling with how to recreate those. I ended up taking these 1-meter panels and copying them around into almost a circle. I used some more to create some horizontal pillars to separate the piece. There were some little holes still showing, so I used this flower detail to cover that up. Then for the large hole in the middle, I ended up taking a flooring brick piece and recoloring it the right color, and this had the added advantage that this whole piece would now be a grid piece, so I could copy it around very easily in the end. But it wasn't quite ready for that yet. I wanted some more detailing on the bottom side of it, so I added one of these flower pieces and some trim pieces around the edges. Finally, I also hid a lamp in the center of it to create some light around the building. Now that I'm happy with it, I took the entire piece and copied it over across the entire ceiling. Like I said before, because it is now a grid piece, this worked very easily, just as easy as just putting in a plain ceiling. Now that the ceiling is in, I did add some more strangler fig roots to the walls of the habitat, just to make it look a little bit more natural and overgrown. And that finishes off this build for now. As you can see all of the underwater area for the Gharials from where the guests are standing, and it is where they spend most of their time, so that is great. You can also go up here and actually see the land area, where you can also watch them eat fairly well. I am really happy with the amount of details that I was able to work into this building, and actually the ceilings that I made last are one of my favorite parts from this building. It just really looks gorgeous. Now, I am aware that part of this building is still empty, we still need education, and the guests can't actually access the building yet. But next time we'll continue on this building to add the other animal, and if you have a guess as to which animal that might be, please put it in the comments, because I'm curious if you can figure that out. For now, the Gharials can already live happily in their new habitat, and I hope I will see you all next time when we will decorate the outside of this building and add some new neighbors for the Gharials. But until then, have a nice day. Bye!